This is the English Language Proficiency Assessment training, which is required for all district and school test coordinators as well as ELPA Summative test administrators. During this training module, I will use ELPA to refer to the Summative English Language Proficiency Assessment for Oregon and ELPA 21 to refer to the consortium which develops and oversees this testing instrument. This module will cover 4 main topics: scheduling, administration, key elements, and best practices. The ELPA Summative is a required Title I-A assessment for all identified English learners. It measures English proficiency in 4 domains, based on Oregon's English Language Proficiency Standards. Further information about EL requirements can be found in the EL Program Guide, located on ODE's Title III webpage. The page link is provided at the end of this testing module for easy reference. Now we'll discuss scheduling. On this slide, you will see the testing window for the coming school year. Districts may enter Administration Code 8 for students who enroll after the close of the statewide test window, but who are enrolled on the first school day in May. For more information about school-level test windows, please refer to Module 1, Test Coordinators, and Section 5.2 of the Test Administration Manual. ELPA Summative is administered in 2 segments. The first segment assesses 3 domains: reading, writing, and listening. The second segment assesses the speaking domain. Prior to testing, please review the settings for the students to ensure that students who were exited from the EL program during the last school year have an EL code of N, because they should not participate in the ELPA Summative during this school year, and all in-program ELs have the flag set to Y. The ELPA Summative will not appear in a student's list of tests if the EL code is set to N. Domain exemptions are allowed. Up to 3 of the 4 domains may be exempted, as per the IEP team decision-making. This must be reflected in the student's IEP prior to starting the test. The exemptions should be verified before the student logs in and starts the test. All students who are participating in the ELPA Summative should have multiple opportunities to practice. This is also a great opportunity for school staff to verify that their headsets are functioning correctly and that the volume is set to an appropriate level. Next, we'll go over test administration. In the Oregon Accessibility Manual, you will find the ELPA Summative Accessibility Supports tables. Please review these tables prior to testing, and remember to ensure that each student has access only to allowable resources. The ELPA Summative Test Delivery System has a too soft warning for the speaking recordings. Although our test vendor has set it at optimal levels for the overall system, local technology and volume settings at the school level can affect how often a student receives this warning when making the recordings. For tasks with multiple recordings, the warning will come at the end of the group of recordings and will list the item numbers that potentially have recordings that are perceived as too soft by the computer. Students should then go back to the items listed and replay or re-record if they choose. Remember that if a student gets the too soft warning, there is no obligation for them to re-record. Best practice is that the student should play back the recording. If they are satisfied with the recording, there is no reason to re-record. If the recording is garbled or inaudible, best practice is to re-record, but this is the student's choice at the time. For some ELPA Summative speaking tasks, there are clustered or grouped speaking items. If the computer system perceives that one or all of the clustered recordings are too soft, the pop-up warning will include the test question number that caused the warning. The student can then go back to that item or items, if more than one in the group, and follow the best practices outlined a moment ago. If the warning message appears again after the student has re-recorded and or is satisfied with the response, the student is allowed to move on. There is never a reason to cause a student to re-record over and over again if the response is audible and the student is satisfied. The required verbatim instructions for students provided in the TAM include this information to try to reduce the number of times students re-record when it is unnecessary. In the speaking section of the test, User error may prevent accurate capture of student responses. It may be worth a few minutes of extra training here to ensure that TAs and students fully understand how the speaking section operates. While it's always the student's choice whether to listen to their submitted speaking responses, TAs should encourage students to take advantage of this opportunity. Only the student is in a position to know whether a recorded response is blank or garbled in time to take corrective action. Pressing the record button overwrites the previously recorded response. So when listening to their recorded responses, students should take care to click play rather than record. Recording takes place in a single attempt. It is not possible to continue or modify a recorded response. As previously noted, domain exemptions from a student's IEP must be pre-programmed before the student begins the ELPA Summative. If the student begins the ELPA Summative with inappropriate domains being administered, this must be reported. The student should not be inappropriately tested. Please review the TAM for additional information on this topic. Also, note that it generally takes at least one business day for a recently programmed domain exemption to appear correctly for the student. It is not instantaneous. If there is any doubt about which domain exemptions a student on an IEP should have, do not start the ELPA Summative. Verify the correct exemptions are programmed prior to allowing the student to begin the test. Remember that the IEP that is in force when the student started the ELPA Summative is the IEP that governs any domain exemptions. If the domain exemptions are changed due to the scheduling of the annual IEP meeting, but the student has already started the test, the IEP that was in force on the start date that the student logged in to start the ELPA Summative dictates which domain exemptions the student should have. If there is a potential conflict due to IEP meeting dates, do not have the student start the ELPA Summative, thereby locking in the domain exemptions for that test. Instead, have the student begin the test after the updated IEP is in force, but consider the number of sessions the student might need to fully complete their ELPA Summative by the test window closure date. Under key elements, we'll mention important dates and points to keep in mind. Newcomer English learners may have different testing requirements for the content tests. Please see Table 22, Assessment Requirements for EL Students based on enrollment date, for the listing of important dates and testing requirements. No identified EL can opt out from participation in the annual ELPA Summative, aside from the religious and disability exemptions which apply to all mandatory state testing. There are no 4 domain exemptions. This is federal guidance that has been in force for a number of years. Refer to the EL Program Guide for additional information on this topic. Always refer to the Oregon Accessibility Manual Section 5.0 ELPA Summative for information on translations of directions only on the ELPA Summative items. There is no read aloud of passages or test questions for the ELPA Summative other than what is pre-programmed into the online test itself. We'll finish with a few best practice recommendations. It's important that students and TAs have a chance to interact with the test format and technology before the test date arrives. Take advantage of the sample tests available on the state testing portal. The ELPA 21 Consortium recommends adjusting the ratio of testing students to TAs based on grade band. See the recommended ratios in the table on this slide. It may be useful to have students pause the ELPA Summative to break up their testing sessions. It may also be useful to have systems in place that expedite the login process, such as providing students with name tags with pictures. This is an optional point in the required training to pause and discuss the questions provided or locally developed set of relevant questions. If you would like to pause, please pause now. Suggested activities include, for small groups, use Post-its to capture local considerations and challenges, 1 per sheet, mount Post-its or share effective approaches, look at artifacts, or use a note organizer to capture take-homes and next steps. For larger groups, facilitate a review or summary of considerations and challenges from across the large group, or facilitate a share-out, or writing down approaches via a chart pack. Finally, here are some links to other helpful test administration and ELPA resources. This concludes the ELPA Summative training module. Thank you for your time, and good luck with this year's testing.